Uh, Good morning, everybody. Uh, my name is Tundrup Gelbo. I'm a senior research fellow at Tibet Policy Institute. First of all, I would like to begin by extending a warm welcome to the maiden international conference of Tibet Policy Institute, themed on Chinese leadership transition and its implications on Chinese, Tibetans, and other minority nationalities of the People's Republic of China. It is our great honor and pleasure that Sikyong Dr. Sangay, despite his very busy schedule, is attending the inaugural session of this conference. We are also very pleased and honored to have various dignitaries of Central Tibetan administration attending today's event. As you would all know, Tibet Policy Institute is one of the flagship initiatives of the current administration of Sikyong Dr. Lobsang, the democratically elected first political successor of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Since its formal inauguration in February this year, Tibet Policy Institute has been functioning as a think tank, an intellectual, research-oriented intellectual platform for Central Tibetan administration. It has been conducting research on various issues and challenges facing the Central Tibetan administration. It has been conducting research on the overall position of Central Tibetan administration in the next 5 or 50 years, and also on various issues related with the welfare of Tibetan people in exile all over the world. Despite the fact that Tibet Policy Institute is today at a very nascent stage, some outstanding China scholars from across the world are attending the first international conference. We are therefore deeply honored and grateful for their enthusiastic support, and we look forward to their expert presentation on various issues related with the Chinese leadership transition. During the course of this conference, several prominent Tibetan scholars, as well as a whole new generation of young Tibetan scholars, will also present Tibetan perspectives on various issues related with the generational shift in the Chinese leadership. Just as the entire world is trying to figure out the significance and ramifications of the once-in-a-decade Chinese leadership transition, it is our hope that this conference will shed some light on the ongoing global discourse on the whole host of spectacular economic, political, social changes and contradictions that have come to define the so-called peaceful rise of China, or to use the Xi Jinping's word, the great rejuvenation of Chinese nation. With these words, I would now like to invite Honorable Kalon Dicki Choyyang, the Kalon of Department of Information and International Relations, who is also the Vice Chair of Tibet Policy Institute, to kindly deliver the her welcome address for today's event.
Welcome. My name is Dicki Choyyang, as Tony stated. I'm responsible for the Department of Information and International Relations for the Central Tibetan Administration. On behalf of the CTA, I would like to restate a warm welcome to all our guests. I know that some of you have been here several times, and for others, this may be your first time, so welcome in this cold weather of Dharamsala. Be sure that you're not at the coldest time of the year. It's actually getting much colder in February, so you're just at the beginning of the cold. So before I'm not going to take too much time, but I want to say a few things about the Tibet Policy Institute. Mr. Gyalpo already stated a little bit about this initiative that we have. Since its inception, the Tibet Policy Institute has so far hosted 2 conferences. This is the 3rd one. The previous 2, one was about the environment, and the other was about Taiwan. This initiative is very important. Although we have modest resources, it was initiated because we felt a very strong need to have a think tank that proper to the Central Tibetan Administration that could conduct the necessary research to advise the Central Tibetan Administration leadership on policy making. We want this institute to reach international standards in terms of intellectual rigor and objectivity. What we don't want is the equivalent of the Chinese propaganda machine, but on the Tibetan side. We want the researchers to do the research with as much emotional detachment as possible. During the next few days, you'll hear several of the staff of the Tibet Policy Institute, and we welcome your feedback on how we can reinforce our institutional capacity. What are the kind of institutional linkages that we can create between the Institute and other international institutions to reinforce its capacity and train the staff and build its staff, recruit new staff. Because this is such a new initiative, we are really at a very modest beginning, but we are very confident that this will become a very important institution in feeding our thinking about the future of the Tibetan community, the Tibetan people at large, not only in the diaspora, but also inside Tibet. Many of you are involved in your day-to-day lives in research. Some of you are through professional engagement and responsibilities other than direct research. So your feedback after you hear some of our research and thoughts is really important, and we welcome it. The context of today's conference, over today and the next 2 days, is very interesting. We have held, conferences have taken place about leadership transition in China at other times. Even with this leadership transition, there's been several meetings and discussions. I want to highlight some of the contextual factors, though, that make this discussion very not only timely, but very particular and quite different from the other times where we have discussed leadership transfer. One is, of course, the wave of self-immolation inside Tibet. 2 is the Chinese economy slowing down. And then, as I discussed when I attended last month a Southeast Asian Human Rights Conference in Jakarta, there were some people from mainland China who work in the field of human rights. The general context within China, where there's within the general population, there's a general sense of hopelessness. So, and then also, of course, I'm sure you're all following the growing tension in the South China Sea between China and the neighboring countries. So, without elaborating any further, I'd like to close by saying that the work that you are a part of by being here, and the link, the relationship that you have now with the Tibet Policy Institute and the exchanges are also very important in the sense that our community, with the devolution of political power from His Holiness to the elected leadership, political leadership is now resting on the shoulder of the people and the elected leadership. As I've stated frequently when I've had exchanges with the Tibetan community in Europe and North America and even here in India, we're moving from the connection between the Tibetan diaspora and Tibetan people inside Tibet from a faith-based connection to try to take it to one that is a political based connection, where we want this to be based on political leadership, a sense of a shared vision as a people. And for that, the quality of the thinking that comes out and the leadership the vision that comes out of Dharamsala is going to be critical. So I thank you for all of you, all our guest speakers, for traveling so far, and I look forward to exchanging with you individually over the next few days. And I would like now to hand the mic over to Demla. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Community Chairman. I would now like to request Sikyong Dr. Lobsang to kindly deliver his keynote address for today's event.
Colleagues of the Kasha, members of the Parliament, and many civil servants, dedicated civil servants of Central Tibet Administration, and special welcome to experts from different countries. And as we say in India, and today we really mean it when we say warm welcome to our experts, because this is a time in Dharamsala when it's quite cold. And as we normally say in winter in Dharamsala, it's warmer outside the house than inside the house. It seems the organizers have, again, whether deliberately or not, just made you sit right next to the door where wind will be blowing quite hard, and I'm sure you will feel the chill. So really warm and hearty welcome, as we say in India. And again, as per our protocol, normally we always get introduced as saying, oh, the Sikyong's given his busy time that he's here. Actually, I've been here in India. Actually, it's you all who actually, have spared your precious time, in fact, to come all the way to Dharamsala. The fact that it's Christmas, the fact that now in a few days' time it will be New Year, meaning you have not only given up your Christmas break and New Year break to come all the way to Dharamsala to be with us means a lot. It reflects your true friendship, commitment, and support for Tibetan people. I know not many people will spare even a single holiday for normal formal engagements, but the fact that you have now spared your time from your family members to come here means a lot to us. And also particularly Professor Chongping Ling, we all know about his writing, and we also want to hear his views so that we'll get a perspective that is profound as well as very helpful to Tibetans, particularly maybe to Buddhists as well. Maybe there might be some Buddhist element or interpretation to his statement. And obviously, Dr. Gordon Chang, very famous around the world for his book, Coming Collapse of China. And as myself being a member of the China Pole, and Gordon Chang's theory still holds, and we would really like to hear his substantive analysis from economic point of view and social point of view and political point of view, what is going on in China that is relevant to us, because as a Tibetan, we have to be at least prepared. All kinds of possibilities in coming years and decades. So in that sense, your perspective will be very, very important. And Professor Madhubalaji and Avanti Bhattacharya-ji. We also want to hear, hopefully, maybe counter theories to other two, so that we can have a, in this cold Dharamsala, we'll have a heated debate, and then everybody will feel warm and hot. And very old-time friend, Professor Michael Van Walt. He's our, I remember reading some, maybe China and Pakistan called themselves as weather-tested friendship, but Michael is, in fact, a weather-tested friend, a supporter for Tibet and Tibetan people. Even though now, as per His Holiness' vision, the new or the younger generation have taken over the leadership, but people like Michael and others around the world who still feel so much committed to Tibet and Tibetan people, and they are willing to do to the best they can, which they have been doing and continue to do so for Tibet and Tibetan people. So in that sense, heartfelt appreciation. And we have other friends like Tu Roy and other Tibetan speakers who will be speaking. So, you all are very much welcome, and your expertise will help us also prepare and think it through as to how we should prepare ourselves in coming months and years, especially with the changes in the Chinese leadership now. It will have global implications, regional, and very much to India as well as Tibetan people. So all we know is now 7 people have taken over in the 18-party Congress. We know their names: Xi Jinping, Li Keqiang, Wang Qishan, Zhang Gaoli, Zhang Deiqiang, and Yu Zhengsheng and Liu Yunshan. But then we know a bit of sketches of their background as well, who leans towards what. And the person who is, at least some of the people or the leaders who are relevant to us, directly relevant to us, of course all 7, but then Xi Jinping is the key. And then person who is head of the National Political Consultative Conference, Yu Zhengsheng, he is reportedly representative of Deng Xiaoping's family, but he's also the eldest, I think 6-7 years old in the 7 members. Maybe he will act as the mediator or the gravitas in the 7 members' leadership. So how does it affect the Tibet issue? And then someone who's directly relevant to us is also Ling Qihua of the United Front. Now, how he came about to that position is also very interesting. At one time, he's reported to be appointed all the way to 7 members. If not to the 7 standing committee, then at least with the Politburo. Now he's just a member of the Central Committee, but then right-hand man of Hu Jintao. So we have Xi Jinping, who is the son of Xi Zhongshun, who had, again, connection with His Holiness Dalai Lama, mainly with Panchen Lama, and also Tibet. And then Yu Zhongsheng with Deng Xiaoping family. Again, Deng Xiaoping had relevance to Tibet is he and when Gyalpo Thondu, the eldest brother of His Holiness Dalai Lama, met in early 80s, Deng Xiaoping said, other than independence, anything can be discussed as far as Tibet is concerned. So if he is the representative of Deng Xiaoping's family, there is Deng Xiaoping's legacy to it. But then we have Ling Qihua, who is the representative, obviously right-hand man till recently, of Hu Jintao. In the last decade of Hu Jintao's leadership, not much progress happened as far as Tibet issue is concerned. And when he was appointed the party general secretary, it coincided with the martial law being imposed on Tibetans. And then there were some reports, tidbits, saying that it was Ling Qihua who told Hu Jintao to go to Lhasa and crack down on Tibetans and impose martial law, so that it could be his one chance for him to show his leadership, so that Sung Ping, his mentor, could promote him and present him to Deng Xiaoping at that time, and he could take over from Wen Jiabao, because they are of similar age, except for a month. Hu Jintao was younger, and then Hu Jintao was, I think at that time, 49 years and 11 months, and when Java was 50 years and a couple of months older, and they were looking for someone below the age of 50. And then Hao Songping presented Hu Jintao to Deng Xiaoping, affected, and because he did follow the party's directive and impose martial law in Tibet Autonomous Region at that time, mainly in Lhasa. So some say the mastermind behind that idea was Ling Qiuhua. Now, if he is the head of the United Front, with whom we have direct leaning, how does it affect? So this is something we have to analyze and follow, because personnel, again, is very important. And unfortunately, Ling Qiuhua's son, the way he met with an accident, some say it's one Tibetan woman or two Tibetan women. I don't know how father will react to that. I mean, there's a psychological dimension. I don't know if we have a psychiatrist here, they might help us. But then all these are very important in any kind of negotiation. A lot of dynamics and a lot of factors involved. Now, as a whole, how does the Chinese government and Chinese leadership react or respond to or treat Tibetans in particular and quote-unquote minorities in general? Perhaps is reflected in the composition of the Politburo and Central Committee. In the Politburo, in the last Politburo, there used to be at least one representative of quote-unquote minority. There was a Hui. Now in this Politburo, there's none. So what does it mean? Now, even in Central Committee, in the present Central Committee, there's 39 representation from quote-unquote minorities, of which only 10 are permanent members. The rest are alternate members. Now what does it mean? Because in the 17th Party Congress, there used to be 16 permanent members in the Central Committee of quote-unquote minorities. There used to be 2 Tibetans. Now, in that sense, there's a decrease in the representation in the Central Committee as well, from 7.8% in the 17th Party Congress to 7.6% to 4.8%. Even though quote-unquote minorities in China is around 8%, now their representation has decreased below 5% in the Central Committee. Does that reflect their overall outlook towards minorities? That's how they're going to treat. And if they cannot even have a token representation in Central Committee, far less in the Politburo, what does it mean? So does the Chinese leadership see the minority issues as resolved, or they can just walk over and then that the world will also pay less attention? Is that it, or what is it? So we would like to hear from experts here at macro and micro level. And now obviously you see Xi Jinping traveling to some of the southern states like Deng Xiaoping did, and then there's an element of nationalism in his speeches, and there's also a military aspect to his speeches, and obviously cracking down on corruption. Is it the same kind of crackdown that we have from moment to moment? Is it his consolidation the factor that you're demonstrating yourself as strong? And then you can see certain reforms, perhaps political reforms, coming along. I think Nicholas Kristof of New York Times, he's in Beijing, and he also says he's mildly optimistic traveling around Beijing, because he sees an element of liberalism in Xi Jinping. That's what he says. And is that the ground reality or not? Because just in November, I think 71 Chinese scholars, top Chinese scholars, issued a public statement, demanding, some use the word demanding, or asking for certain reforms from the government, particularly lifting of the internet censorship, rule of law, and personal appointment, all that. Now this, again, the signatories to this petition is important. I think one is the son of Hu Yaobang, and also the topmost, I think, considered as topmost legal expert on China, and others, Beda and then and other top universities. What does it mean? Is Choyyang son, I think, is opening a space for Xi Jinping to come to political reforms or not? So all these are very important and relevant for us. Then what does it mean now with the election over in America, with the presidential election over? What does it mean for Asia as a whole? Because the declared foreign policy of US government is it will pivot towards Asia. And what does that mean in geopolitical context, and especially for us in human rights context? And we would like to see it's a welcome gesture that President Obama, soon after his election, he traveled to Asia with Burma, Cambodia, and Thailand, all three Buddhist countries. So does that mean that he will have a maybe priority to other Buddhist communities like Tibetans or not, is to be seen. And also he traveled to three countries where they drink the water that flows from Tibet, the Mekong Delta. So, all to be seen, and we welcome also the appointment of Senator John Kerry as the Secretary of State. He is very familiar with the issue of China as a whole and Tibet in particular. His Holiness and Tibetan leaders have met him several times, and I also had the privilege of meeting him last July with His Holiness Dalai Lama when His Holiness was welcomed by the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and at that time it was pretty clear Senator John Kerry knows about the issue of Tibet, and I also had the privilege of meeting this July, and I spent 40 minutes talking about issues of Tibet. So he was also very much familiar, and so these are some of the positive aspects that we would like to see translated into some concrete policies as far as Tibet is concerned. So this and many other issues are relevant to the issue of Tibet. And then, given your expertise, we are looking forward to a very insightful, substantive, and hopefully optimistic conclusion. Because the fact that in the last 50 years, as a human being, we always have to remain hopeful. But then we are still very hopeful. But the last 50 years, except for brief period in 80s, when Choyyang was at the helm, we don't have much reason to be optimistic. But then looking forward, maybe it's overanalyzed, but the fact that Xi Jinping is the son of Sikyong Dr, who welcomed His Holiness in 1954 during his first visit, the fact that he kept his watch throughout the Cultural Revolution, and the photograph he had in his pocket when he met the Tibetan delegates, I think whether he took it from the album on that day or he literally kept it for so long, and then what does it mean, whether son will follow the mindset of father or not, all this to be seen. So whatever happens, it will be quite dynamic and interesting in years to come. And then the present tragedy in Tibet is real, it's very painful and sad. At the same time, it also reflects the strength of Tibetan spirit and Tibetan solidarity. We all know 95 Tibetans have self-immolated, of which 80 have died. And in 2012 alone, 82 Tibetans self-immolated. And in the month of November, the largest number of self-immolation in any month was in the month of November. So what does it mean? And in the month of November, we had the US presidential election, 18-party Congress, and our special meeting of Tibet Support Group also happened to be in November. So why there was a rapid increase of self-immolators in Tibet at that time? What are the Tibetans inside Tibet are telling us or sending us a message and hoping from us? Their aspirations are made very clear. They want to see the return of His Holiness Dalai Lama to Tibet and freedom for Tibetans. Now, can we fulfill their aspirations or not? And what is the stand of Tibetan administration on self-immolation? We have made it very clear and repeatedly in the Tibetan media, in the Indian media, as well as in Western media, saying we do not encourage any drastic actions by Tibetans inside Tibet. We do not encourage self-immolations by Tibet inside Tibet. That we have made it very clear. But as a Buddhist or people of any faith, when someone passes away, we pray for them. So we have organized prayers. And as a Tibetan, we show solidarity because those who have committed self-immolation, particularly those who have died, they left this world, sending us a message that you all should do the best you can and more to fulfill the aspirations for Tibetan people. And then we do support, hence their aspirations. Now, if you look at the genesis or the background of the self-immolation, it's pretty clear. We don't have to go back to 60s. 87, 88, and 89, there were a series of demonstrations, mainly around Lhasa. But it was followed by a crackdown and martial law. And then in 2006 and 2007, there were other forms of protest. In 2006, the anti-fur campaign. Tibetans traditionally, as per our custom, we always used to wear chuba, traditional dress, with an animal fur of tiger and leopards of some endangered species. But His Holiness gave a speech in South India where he was giving the Kalachakra teaching, urging Tibetans not to wear animal fur skin. Soon thereafter, in a few weeks' time, inside Tibet, there were bonfires burning animal fur everywhere in Tibet. Now, the significance of that, the bonfire, is for Tibetans having this piece of animal fur, whether it's tiger or leopard, is very precious and very expensive as well. Now, when His Holiness made the call, and when Tibetan starts burning it, it's equivalent to, women nowadays giving up their Gucci bag and burning it because their leaders told them, or men giving up the Omega or Rolex watch and burning it because their leaders told them to, because it's very expensive. But they've invested so much, it's hundreds of years of custom. But then they did. Now if you go to Tibet, you will not find, maybe few, you will not find Tibetans wearing animal fur skin. But that was a demonstration of Tibetans inside Tibet's loyalty and reverence towards His Holiness Dalai Lama, even after 50 years of separation. Then in 2007, Ronge Ada and others called for His Holiness' return. There were demonstrations in a couple of places. And 2008, we know, from March on, demonstrations all over the Tibetan region, in 100 different counties. What happened? Soon after, crackdown followed. Many were arrested, many were shot dead, disappeared. Then you see from 2009, obviously, with Tabe, but mainly from March 16th of 2011, series of self-immolations. The point being, whenever Tibetan demonstrated, in 87, 88, 89, it was harshly cracked down. In 2006, crackdown. 2008, crackdown. Hence, Tibetans left with no space for any form of protest or freedom of speech. It seems to have concluded that self-immolation is one form of protest that they can have control over, how they can express themselves and protest against the repressive policies of the Chinese government. And so obviously the Chinese government now has released a CCTV documentary and a couple of documents alleging that it's being instigated by us from outside. But then, interestingly, they give Buddhist interpretation to self-immolation, whether it's Buddhistic or not. It's odd that a Communist Party of China, which believes that religion is poison, suddenly has become an interpreter or translator of Buddhist texts and telling Tibetans whether it's Buddhist or not. But their strategy seems to be to have the world focus on the action. And obviously the action is complex. We acknowledge that. That's why we have also made it very clear. We urge Tibetans not to resort to self-immolation. But we have to focus on the cause. What are the causes that force or that is forcing Tibetans to self-immolation? Obviously, occupation, political repression, economic marginalization, environmental destruction, cultural assimilation, and religious repression. So these are the causes from 87 on. And obviously from 50s, but 87 on, no matter what form of protest Tibetans resorted to, they were harshly cracked down. Hence, sadly, Tibetans have resorted to self-immolation. Now, how do we fulfill the aspirations of the Tibetan people? Obviously, one is to appeal to the international community. Obviously, now there are a couple of writers have interpreted the self-immolation. What exactly do they mean? Are they appealing to exiled Tibetans for their solidarity, or are they appealing to the international community for their support, or are they appealing to internally to the Chinese leadership to bring changes to the Tibetan cause? And then what exactly are they saying? Now, internally we have this debate about Rangze and Rawang. Which wood do they use? Which wood do they use the most? All these are on the table, and before we give our perspective, which I have also made it quite clear, we would like to hear your insightful analysis so that not only the scholars of Tibet Policy Institute will benefit from it, which is just 1 year old. We named Tibet Policy Institute on November 11, 2011. So it's 111111. So we want it to be the #1 think tank as far as Tibetan world is concerned. And our competition is not that difficult to beat, given the Chinese government propaganda element and their think tanks. I think we will be #1 in the Tibetan world. But hopefully down the line we want to be #1, perhaps in the region and internationally as far as Tibet is concerned. Our ambition is there, but then what we need is your support and your help, and especially your expertise, and help us build our researchers here to give them the exposure, give them your wisdom and knowledge, so that Tibetans can stand on our own feet and represent ourselves at regional level and international level and speak for Tibetans inside Tibet. Really appreciative. Again, let me conclude by thanking once more, and especially warm welcome, and looking forward to a heated discussion so that Dharamsala will come alive and say, yes, that was the first international conference where we had top-notch scholars from around the world and who really lit the fire, and Tibet Policy Institute has become what it has become down the line. So we are looking forward to your discussion and your analysis. And I also want to acknowledge my friend here from London, who will be also speaking sometime in the next few days. So with that note, and on behalf of my colleagues and representation from our Justice Commission and from the Tibetan Parliament, hearty welcome. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Sikyong Dr. Sangay. Ladies and gentlemen, the inaugural session of today's conference concludes here. We will now break for a short tea break. After that, the first session of today's panel discussion will begin at 10:45.